Before I begin, a brief disclaimer. Because of the writer's strike, the following sermon was written by ChatGPT. What can I say? This annual Chai Society Shabbat, at which we bless congregants of longest vintage, pro tip, never say oldest congregants, and induct the newest class of those who have affiliated for 18 years, prompts me to take us on a walk down memory lane. And so this year we would look back to 2005, when our newest Chai Society members joined the synagogue. At that point, at the age of 32, I had served for 2 years as WRT's associate rabbi, working alongside senior Rabbi Rick Jacobs, Cantor Stephen Merkel of blessed memory, and Rabbi Cantor Angela Buchdahl. Rabbi Jack Stern and Cantor Joe Boardman, now both of blessed memory, were around to lend their friendship and support and mentorship. Times have certainly changed. Among other distinctions, I am now not only the oldest, but also the tallest member of the WRT clergy. Don't get too excited. I am soon to be eclipsed by Isaac. I will enjoy lording my temporary and not particularly impressive stature over my colleagues for as long as I can. Thank you very much. But back to 2005. Major headlines that year included the second inauguration of President George W. Bush, the death of Pope John Paul, and the election of his successor, Benedict XVI, the terrorist bombings of the London Underground, the withdrawal of Israeli settlers from the Gaza Strip, and Hurricane Katrina. Amid all these, one minor headline also caught my eye. From the April 2nd, 2005 edition of the Washington Post, it reads, "For a big conservative synagogue, a new style of rabbi." And the article goes on to declare that with the hiring of Francine Green Roston, age 36, a New Jersey synagogue, Congregation Bethel in South Orange, has secured a small place in Jewish history, becoming the first conservative temple anywhere with more than 500 families to hire a female rabbi since the denomination began ordaining women in 1985. That same year, the conservative movement was roiled by a debate about whether or not to ordain gay and lesbian clergy, a decision that they reached in the affirmative the following year. Given WRT's own long history of hiring diverse clergy, including clergy who are women, clergy who are gay, clergy who are Jews of color, it might surprise you to learn that just 18 years ago such matters even made the news. It might also surprise you to learn that the conservative movement was not really all that far behind our own reform movement, which ordained women beginning in 1972 and started admitting openly gay clergy to Hebrew Union College only in 1989, and which hired the first woman to lead a major metropolitan congregation, Rabbi Laura Geller at Temple Emmanuel of Beverly Hills, in 1994, which is less than 30 years ago. In other words, the rabbinate and at the same time the cantorate have been changing rapidly and relatively recently. And gender, sexual orientation, and skin color are only a few of the lenses through which to observe and explore this phenomenon. Many other changes, less overt perhaps, but no less significant, have also transformed the role, definition, and expectations of Jewish clergy, at least in the non-Orthodox world. Though I will say I had the privilege of hearing yesterday Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz, the first female ordained rabbi to lead a spiritual community, ordained by Rabbi Avi Weiss of Riverdale, New York. And so even the Orthodox movement is shifting. The images of cantors and rabbis that I carried into my rabbinate came, as should be expected, from my childhood, growing up at a Reform congregation in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Cantor David Green, portly and jovial, with a bushy black beard and glasses with Coke bottle thick lenses, and a magnificent baritone voice, who, when I was 10, took me under his wing to study trope, Torah and Haftarah cantillation, and later cantorial nusach. And Rabbi Herb Brockman, also lushly bearded, who spoke with passion and eloquence and who blessed the congregation at the end of every Friday night service with a formal benediction, hands extended in the sign of the Kohen, "May the Lord bless you and keep you." They wore black robes and stood on a high bima, and we listened politely and raptly to the organ and the choir, who sang from aloft, heard but never seen. It was all very impressive. When I was a teenager, my family also affiliated at a conservative shul in nearby Bethlehem, where I learned to daven shacharit on Shabbat mornings, to refine my skills in laning Torah, and to tutor students for bar and bat mitzvah, a gig that proved to be a whole lot more lucrative than my first after-school job as customer service representative at the local Blockbuster Video. Blockbuster Video. Now there's a sign of how times have changed. In a world where you can stream your services online, and hi, we see you, and we appreciate that you're joining us tonight, wherever you may be. Thank goodness synagogues like ours have not become the Blockbuster Videos of Judaism. We have not resisted change, but rather we have found meaningful ways to adapt to the relentless march, or more like sprint, of technological advancement. After all, as I often remind us, here at WRT, reform is our middle name, and our embrace of innovation has long distinguished us as a congregation on the forefront of Jewish life in America. Still, change, even when necessary, is rarely easy, and I know that I speak for innumerable colleagues as well when I confess that the changes in the cantorate and the rabbinate of the last couple of decades, at least in the non-Orthodox world, have oftentimes knocked us off our keel. Many of us Reformed clergy shed the robe, lowered the bima, sold the organ, brought the choir out from the loft, picked up the guitar, and hired a world-famous jazz pianist to lift our voices and our spirits. And that's just what happened in this room. Everywhere else, our work and our role has also changed. My first rabbinic mentor, Les Gutterman, at my first pulpit, Temple Bethel in Providence, Rhode Island, where I served as assistant rabbi from 2000 to 2003, would receive handwritten pink telephone call memos from a person he called his secretary, who also took dictation for his sermons and newspaper articles. In contrast, I was the first rabbi in the country to sign up for Facebook and to use it as a workplace communications tool for reaching high school and college students who had grown up at WRT. In those days, and yes, it does sound funny even to me to refer to the beginning of my rabbinate in the year 2000 as those days, but still, those days applies. The rabbi was perceived to stand not only above the congregation, but also in significant ways above the cantor, with highly differentiated roles and responsibility. Put simply, cantor sings, rabbi preaches. And even if this public perception did not quite capture the nuance of the behind-the-scenes reality of rabbis and cantors and other leaders, both lay and professional, working together, collaborating, it nevertheless contained at the time a kernel of truth. But that was then, and this is now. And cantors today are not merely invested, but ordained, with the authority to lead communities alongside rabbis. Here at WRT, for instance, all of our rabbis and cantors not only lead worship and teach, but we preach, we conduct weddings and b'nai mitzvah, namings and funerals. We counsel congregants, and we represent our congregation in local and national leadership positions. In fact, just this year, Cantor Kleiman represented WRT at the National Council of AIPAC in Washington and was recently elected to the board of the American Conference of Cantors. Each week, she joins me, the temple president, and our executive director at a leadership conference and participates actively in temple board and executive committee meetings. When I took sabbatical, Cantor Kleinman served as our senior spiritual leader, managing the clergy team and many of the day-to-day decisions for WRT. So even as rabbis and cantors have, in congregations like ours, begun to share the responsibilities of leadership, we have all seen our perception in the Jewish community shift as well. For over the last couple of decades, rabbis and cantors have become radically more accessible to the community. And as we have come down off the bema, literally and figuratively, congregants have come to know their clergy as human beings, with all the wonderful and beautiful qualities that come with real human relationships, as well as the disillusionment that often accompanies the recognition of another's humanity with all our flaws and frailty. In the Jewish tradition, clergy, that is to say spiritual leaders, today's rabbis and cantors, sometimes collectively go by the nickname Klei Kodesh, which means instruments of holiness. Originally, this term applied in a literal sense to the vessels used in the ancient temple, the utensils used by the Kohen, the Israelite priest, in the sacrificial service. It also nowadays applies to things like Kiddush cups and Shabbat candlesticks and Seder plates and all sorts of other Judaica that you probably have in your home. But idiomatically, Klei Kodesh, instruments of holiness, also refers to those who serve as Jewish spiritual leaders. The original Klei Kodesh, the Kohanim or biblical priests, were subject to regulations and restrictions that defined and maintained their status as instruments of holiness, and especially their status as different than, separate from, the rest of the Jewish community. As Cantor Kleinman chanted tonight from the 21st chapter of Leviticus, they were to be kept from ritual contamination, and on account of this, could not even mourn their dead relatives, death being a primary source of ritual impurity. To this day, as many of you are surely aware, a Jew who derives from priestly lineage, that is to say a Kohen, may refuse to enter a cemetery even to bury a parent. These restrictions, designed to maintain priestly holiness, comprise the several opening verses of this week's Torah portion, Emor. Another way of protecting the holy status of the Kohen was by restricting his selection of a wife to a virgin bride from among the Israelite nation. Divorcees, widows, harlots, or non-Jews need not apply. Unless you think that public scrutiny over whom the Klei Kodesh may marry is but an arcane relic of an ancient cult, I would direct your attention to a debate that has from time to time garnered public attention, including over the past several months and years. For as long as anyone can remember, Hebrew Union College, our seminary, the training ground for Reform Klei Kodesh and other Jewish professionals, has restricted admission for the rabbinical and cantorial program based on the religious identity of a candidate's spouse or significant other. I will read from the website of HUC. The Reform Movement and HUC-JIR share a proud record of reaching out to all who seek to develop their Jewish identity with love and acceptance. Even as our students actively engage in this important work, as rabbis or cantors, we expect them to model a firm and lasting commitment to the Jewish home and the Jewish future through the choices they make in their own family lives. We celebrate the contribution of people of all faiths toward building and sustaining loving Jewish homes, and yet we believe that rabbis and cantors should exemplify a distinct standard of Jewish continuity. Therefore, HUC-JIR, the seminary, will only admit, graduate, or ordain candidates who, if in a committed long-term relationship, are in such a relationship with a Jewish partner. It is important that candidates for our program be aware of this policy at the point of application. We encourage you to speak with an admissions director if you have questions or concerns. Well, to say the least, students in particular have indeed expressed questions and concerns over the last many years, and presently, even as I speak, the leadership of the seminary is weighing a possible change in policy yet to be announced. Recent decisions by both the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in Philly and Hebrew College, not to be confused with Hebrew Union College, Hebrew College being a trans-denominational Jewish seminary in Boston, now to admit candidates in marriages or serious relationships with non-Jewish partners, have accelerated and amplified the debate within Reform Jewish circles about HUC's restrictive policies. I will not opine here about how I think the decision should go, because I do not wish to exert undue influence on your own ability to think through the issue. I will go so far as to say that the fact that this long-standing policy is up for consideration is itself another sign of the times, a sign of the changing role of Klei Kodesh, another indicator that Jewish society is grappling with how much its clergy should mirror the Jewish practices and norms, including family norms, of the people we serve, or should adhere to different, that is to say more stringent standards, the same way the Kohen, the priest, and the expectations surrounding his choices were different than for those of an ordinary Israelite. It is also a sign of the times that a little over a month ago, New York passed a law 16 years in the making that authorizes any person to solemnize weddings for one day. This is a shift in New York's long-standing law that requires only duly ordained clergy or permitted government officials to preside over weddings. As a result, your rabbis here at WRT and cantors might expect to conduct fewer weddings over the coming years, as more and more couples are asking friends to officiate, and the unique role of Klei Kodesh, at least here in New York, is as a consequence diminished. A few concluding reflections. This Shabbat, for me, is bookended by two celebrations. Yesterday, I attended the graduation ceremonies of Hebrew Union College at Temple Emmanuel, that great Reform Jewish cathedral at 65th and 5th, at which degrees were presented to many of my closest friends and colleagues who were ordained in 1998 and who are receiving an honorary 25-year DD, which stands for Doctor of Divinity degree, but about which the inside joke is that it stands for Doctor of Durability, or even didn't die. These colleagues, including Rabbi Ken Chasen, whom I met in rabbinical school back in 1996, and Rabbi Lori Katzbraun, who actually grew up on my block in Allentown, and Daniel Groper of Community Synagogue of Rye, all served WRT back in the day and have toiled in a milieu of Jewish professional service that is changing faster than any of our crop ever imagined. And then on this coming Sunday morning, as you've heard, the clergy team of WRT will all go back to Temple Emmanuel to witness and celebrate the ordination of the new class of Reform Klei Kodesh, including our own Isaac Sonnet Asor, who will be called to the bima considerably later in the morning than he could have, had he not hyphenated his last name when he got married, given that ordinees are called alphabetically. But what can you do, Isaac? These newly minted spiritual leaders will face challenges and opportunities that we have only begun to contemplate. As Israeli historian, philosopher, and best-selling author Yuval Noah Harari wrote just this week in The Economist, what will happen to the course of history when AI takes over culture, when AI begins producing stories and melodies, laws, and even religions? Previous tools like the printing press and the radio helped spread the cultural ideas of humans, but they never created new cultural ideas of their own. AI is fundamentally different. AI can create completely new ideas, completely new culture. And so this Shabbat, at least for me, stands between two windows. One that allows us to appreciate the Klei Kodesh who have adeptly navigated the challenges and changes in Jewish life for decades, and one that allows us to look ahead with joy, excitement, wonder, and yes, a great deal of uncertainty at the needs and priorities of the Jewish community in decades to come. In order to succeed, both those of us with longer vintage and those for whom Jewish professional service is still an open vista will need to lean into the enduring relevance of Judaism. This is our unique value proposition. This is our undying mission and message, that we, with our Jewish tradition, can bring holiness into a mundane and often vulgar world, transform lives with purpose and vigor, heal the brokenness in hearts and homes and communities, live beyond ourselves, teach and model Torah in a world deprived of its sustaining wisdom, and above all, affirm God in a godless era. What is most important to understand and in this moment is that even as the role of Klei Kodesh evolves, so too do the Jewish people whom we serve. Indeed, the evolution of one cannot be separated from the evolution of the other. So together, let us ride the current of the accelerating river, the ever-changing and yet eternal river of Judaism, the river of God, of Torah, and of Israel. Amen.